The African American Legend series highlights the accomplishments of blacks in areas as varied as politics, sports, aviation, business, literature, and religion. We will explore how African Americans have succeeded in areas where they'd been previously excluded because of segregation, racism, and lack of opportunity. I'm your host, Dr. Roscoe C. Brown, Jr., and with us today is Howie Evans, the sports editor for the New York Amsterdam News. Howie, glad to have you with us again.
Glad to be here, Roscoe. Glad to be anywhere.
Well, you know, there have been so many issues that face blacks in sports. The whole question of black coaches, the whole question of students graduating from college, the whole question of the role of celebrities in the sports world. What do you think the major challenge for blacks in sports is this year?
I think, pardon me, I think the major challenge now, Roscoe, is the fact that all of these young athletes that are coming into pro sports and to a great degree, even on the college level, that they have to understand that although this is 2'9", soon to be 2'10", there hasn't been a lot of changes in the way society looks at them and the way that the media looks at them. And they have to understand when they spit on the floor, they're going to be more criticized than a person of another persuasion, and so forth. And people of color, and we're getting more Hispanics now who are really in large numbers. You know, within 10 years, maybe less, will be the majority players in the Major League Baseball. So they have to understand that people, the mainstream media, who mostly are all white, are very envious of these young men making this kind of money, and they attack them in such a way that that very often is very unprofessional, and they just keep pounding and pounding like they're pounding Alex Rodriguez. I mean, they're not pounding Roger Clemens like that. And Roger Clemens has done 10,000 things worse than any of these other people. They're not pounding Andy Pettit, who was an admitted steroid user. He hasn't been pounded, you know. So that is the major challenge that I see today with young athletes, young African American and Hispanic athletes and athletes of color, is that they have to adapt to this media world, which can really come down and change their world.
Now, that's very interesting because supposedly with the election of an African-American president, America, according to some people, have gotten past the racial issue. You and I know that that's not true because there are many, many issues in professions and jobs and criminal justice that affect African-Americans in a different way than white Americans. But what you're now saying is that the sports writers who are mainly sports writers, sports women, who are mainly Caucasian, tend to be harder on black athletes. Is it subconscious because of the subconscious racism that exists in our society, or is it that, as you say, envy? Because it seems to me they would be envious of white athletes making far more money than they as well. What do you think that is?
I think it's a combination of both. Here's an example. Plaxico Burress goes out to a nightclub, as you well know, and he shoots
the
football player
for New York
with the New York Giants, and he shoots himself in the leg accidentally. Okay, he goes back home, and he comes back to the police station, and he goes to the police station on his own, and reports it. When he comes out of the police station, here are all these mostly Caucasian cops surrounding him because now they want to get in the picture and so forth. But the thing is, he comes out in handcuffs. He hasn't hurt nobody. He hasn't committed a crime, so to speak, because he hurt himself. Now, move down over to Central Park West where Bernie Madoff is. Here's a guy who has literally changed thousands of people's lives. He walks in and out, strolls up and down the street, goes to live in a luxurious penthouse and so forth. He has yet to be indicted. Now, to me, somewhere something is wrong. Now, let's backtrack when Burris did that act of shooting himself. Our mayor said the full extent of the law should come down on him. He has yet to utter one word about Maddox, who has affected this city in such a way that it has never been affected before.
Well, it's clear that there is a difference in the way in which our society views what we call white-collar crime and physical crime. The penalties for physical crime, for mugging, is far greater than the penalty for stealing $3 million, which is not just racial. That has to do with the way in which society looks at it in a capitalist society. But one of the things that you brought up is that the athletes themselves need to be aware of this and need to organize their behavior in such a way that they don't get into this. For example, you shouldn't be carrying a gun to a nightclub, now, regardless of whether you're white, black, or blue. But your point is the disparate treatment once you do get caught.
Yeah, and that's why I'm saying that the Hispanic and the African-American athletes have to be aware of that. These are things they don't tell them. You would not find a Caucasian PR guy who's going to tell Plaxico, look, if you do something bad because you're an African-American, you're going to get in more trouble than the guy who does the same thing. You're going to get more publicity and so forth. You see, so those things don't happen.
Well, let's talk about blacks, African-Americans in the sports writing and media industry. There are a few who we know, but there are very few. What is the dynamic that keeps African Americans from getting more involved in the media?
Well, it's very obvious. They don't want to give black columnists a platform. And I use myself as an example. When years ago, when I had the opportunity to work at all 3 of the major newspapers in the city, and I turned them down because I could not get a guarantee that I would be able to write what I wanted to write and use my column as a platform, not to beat up on people or anything of that nature, but to equalize the treatment and give it a fair description of what is happening, not with just African-American athletes, but all athletes. I couldn't get that.
But you made a good point about projecting your point of view. I guess a columnist, whether it's in politics or entertainment or sports, does project his or her point of view. And what you're suggesting is that most columnists include their own biases and their own views in the way they write. And you're further suggesting that because African Americans are African American and are aware of the racism and the issues that African American athletes face, that they should have an opportunity to write about that. But then what happens when you write about something that's not about African Americans? How is an African American sports writer treated there?
Because years ago, when we got the first wave of black columnists, and it was a very small wave, by the way. You know, you can almost count on your hand the black sports columnists in this country, and even the African-American columnists on the news side, and all. The first wave of these guys was, look, be careful of what you say in your columns. And you could see it when you read all of these guys, that they did not dare say when they were having all of this trouble with Mantle and those guys,
Mantle,
and
yeah.
there was a couple of, you know, and his behavior. A black columnist could not have stomped on him.
On Mickey Mantle, right.
On Mickey Mantle and Billy Martin, who, as you know, had a tremendous alcohol problem, as did Mantle and that group of guys that they were part of. the media embraced this, if you may recall. They thought, oh, this is great. Look at these guys. You know, they're real men and they're doing this, you know. But now here comes a black columnist and says, these guys are terrible. They're a bad example to the youth of America. This guy's not going to have a job. Mm-hmm. He's not going to have a job, you see.
Well, I was thinking as you were talking about sports writers and the history of sports writers, Grantland Rice, Damon Runyon, and one of the icons of sports writing was Sam Lacey. Sam Lacey was an African American. He wrote for the Washington and Baltimore African American for many, many years up until the 90s. At the same time, another icon was Shirley Povich, who's Maury Povich, the talk show's father, right, who wrote for the Washington Post. And it was interesting to see the way they covered it. Povich actually covered some of the black games and advocated black players long before others were talking about it. Sam Lacey would go to the games, knew the players, and helped to project African Americans who were in white colleges or in black colleges. What impact do you think that Sam Lacey had on you and other black sports writers? Sam
Lacey and I were great friends, and we used to sit next to each other at the CIAA tournaments. Those moments I enjoyed more than anything, because we would talk about things, and we're trying to watch the games, and we would talk about things. And I probably learned more and had more respect for Sam Lacey, not as a sports journalist, but as a man. He was totally committed to a cause. He was not afraid to write what he wanted to write, where other black columnists and black newspapers, they were trying to get with white newspapers, so they were very careful in what they wrote. But Sam, Young, Wendell Smith, those guys were totally dedicated.
Doc Young wrote.
Doc Young.
He wrote for the Chicago Defender,
right.
And Wendell Smith wrote for the Pittsburgh Courier.
Exactly.
You might ask, how do I know that? Yeah. Well, this is when I was growing up and following sports, and the way you follow sports at that time was through those three newspapers, the African American, the Pittsburgh Courier, and the Chicago Defender.
Well, Sam Lacey was a tremendous advocate for the inclusion of African Americans in baseball, as you well know. He traveled with Jackie Robinson when he and Wendell Smith took turns living with Jackie because he couldn't stay in the hotels and so forth, at training camp or otherwise. But what happened as a result of that, when you mentioned Shirley Povich, he became a tremendous advocate for the inclusion of African Americans into baseball. And he had as much to do with changing the mood of many people in the country, because he was more widely read. Mm-hmm. So more people read him across the country and all. And he and Sam were very close. They were very close. And Povich wrote tremendous volumes on this, mm-hmm. and so forth. But he was such a prominent writer, and he was such a great writer, and he was so important to the Washington Post that they couldn't shackle him. Mm-hmm. They couldn't take his pen away. They couldn't take his typewriter away, and all. So those things that I tremendously admired Sam Lacey for.
The interesting thing is, what we're talking about now was before television. This was in the 20s and the 30s and the early 40s, before television. Television changed the way in which sports was covered. Not only did they actually see the game and the people could see it and see what they were writing about, but also they became many more opinion makers. Howard Cosell probably being the first of the opinion makers, who also was an advocate for getting African Americans to be recognized in sports. So that now in the 21st century, we have this great sport industry. We have a whole network, ESPN, devoted to sports, and we have the local sports network. What impact do you think that's had on the way in which sports media figures cover sports?
Well, now you brought up an interesting thing when you mentioned ESPN. ESPN is the most diversified sports organization in the world. And I say that because they have embraced black athletes whose careers have ended, even those who are still participating, and put them in positions, not just little wacky positions, but major positions in front of the cameras. They have directors. They have a lot of African American women working in their legal aspects of the company. They have Hispanics working, and you see the tremendous number of women that are working at ESPN. Now, what that has done, it has made fans of many African Americans when they see Pam Oliver out there interviewing on the field when the Giants are playing crummy, and she says, those guys look like they're dead. And every writer in the country came down on her as a result. She said that. But she didn't say anything
that wasn't true.
And she didn't say anything that those other guys have said who've come down on them harder. But because she was an African American woman and she stole something from the mainly Caucasian press, she beat them to it.
Well, what do you think? I know you helped to develop young African American sports writers. How does one go about becoming a sports writer? Do you have to be a player before you're a writer, or you have to be a writer before you play?
What I've found, Roscoe, is that the athlete, if you can get an athlete and you can have him somehow be able to express himself through writing and so forth, you'll get a much more rounded guy than many of the people that you often see on television or on the radio in these talk shows who never played. So they have a different perspective, and their writings are much more intelligent. Now, I have two guys, Jamie Harris and Stephon Johnson, who are both athletes, and Marcus Johnson was an athlete. He played football in high school and college. They were all athletes. So they understand the game, and it reflects in the way in which they write. Now, I've had a lot of guys who've come in and pardon me, wanted to be writers for me, but they couldn't do it because they had no idea of sports. They were good writers, but they were not sports writers. You'd always have to talk about the terminology and this and that. So there was a major difference and all. And the things that working with African American writers that I've worked with over the years, my philosophy has been that I want you to write about the games or the event that you're covering. I don't want you to pound away at people. If you are attacking Joe Girardi or Mike D'Antoni, I want you to do it in a very respectful way. I don't want you to be what we see in the tabloids. I don't want that. I don't want that kind of journalism at all. And it's important that these guys understand that, because sometimes you get guys who want to go in and all of a sudden they want to punch people out, with what they write, and
Now, do African American sports writers, particularly those who represent the Amsterdam News and other black pages, have access to the major sports venues today?
Well, I'll say this. I'll say no. mainly because most of them don't have the support of the publishers. In many of the African American newspapers around the country, the publishers in some way are envious of the guys who are doing sports, because that's not the people that they associate themselves with. That's not the people they socialize with. So the their sports sections reflect that. You know,
but that's been true in the white press as well. The sports department is usually considered to be the recreation room of the newspapers. On the other hand, as sports have become more political and more involved in economics, you see, as you begin to read, more concern about those issues, and I think more respect. I know you cover every major sporting event in the country, and I believe some of your writers do as well.
Yeah, well, we are the only African American newspaper, and by far more so than many other papers in the country. We are fully credentialed for every major sporting event in the world, and that's because we covered the events, and I insisted. I had to go in and do battle with people. I had to battle with the Knicks, I had to battle with the Yankees, had to battle with a lot of people to gain respect, not just for myself, but for our publication, to the point now where people are, young African-American guys from other papers are always calling me, how can I get credentials to the Super Bowl? I said, well, you know, my thing is, well, you have to work at it, you know. You have to go out and cover the games. You know, sometimes you may have to spend your own money if this is what you really want to do. But it's difficult for a lot of them because they don't understand the sacrifices. And I always tell them, you would be amazed at what guys, black sports writers were like in the 40s. You'd be amazed at the lack of things that they had, but look what they accomplished.
Now, the Amsterdam News, where you're the sports editor, is celebrating its 100th anniversary this year. To what extent has the sports section been a major part of the development and the circulation of the Amsterdam News? Well,
I think over the years, I would dare say that the sports department has been very instrumental in continuing the work of Dr. Powell, who was the publisher when I first came there, John Procope, whom you knew, Clarence Jones, and now Bill Tatum.
The late Bill Tatum.
The late Bill Tatum. Now, the most important thing was not ever, since I've been at that paper, did any one of those publishers tell me what not to write. Not ever. And that gave me the freedom to do things and get things done. Because when I first started at the Amsterdam News, we didn't have credentials to anything. We didn't have credentials to nothing.
And of course, when you see the Amsterdam News, the back page, you see all those pictures and the story, the headlines. But one of the things you were particularly interested in is the black colleges, the CIAA, which used to be the Colored Intercollegiate Athletic Association, and after integration it became the Central Intercollegiate Athletic Association. The first tournament was 1946 at Turner's Arena in Washington, D.C. The reason I know that, I was the assistant coach at West Virginia State basketball at that time. And it's grown to be one of the great events in this country. Most recently, you had the 2009 tournament in Johnson C. Smith University, won both the men's and women's basketball championship. Tell us about that.
Well, the CIAA has now flanked all of the other conferences, the Southern Intercollegiate Athletic Association, Southwest.
The black conferences.
The black conferences. They have dwarfed them because they finally got a guy who was a business guy. He's not a sports guy. He was an accountant from a bank. But he also understood that this is a business, not a sport. And the presidents of the institutions in the CIAA slowly started giving him more rope to where he could make decisions without really having to look behind his back or wait for a phone call. Oh, you shouldn't have said that, or you shouldn't have did this. They gave him room to grow, and within that growth, he was able to make the conference grow to the point where they're giving away $3 million in scholarships at the tournament this year, which is distributed amongst the member schools.
How many schools are in the CIAA?
There are 12 schools.
12 schools, yeah.
And you know, they had the big split in 1970 when North Carolina A&T and Howard University and Morgan and all those schools jumped out to form their own, the Mid-East
MEAC, yeah.
The MEAC. That hasn't worked out.
We've come to the close of the show, but how many people were at the most recent the attendance of the most recent CIAA tournament?
I would say maybe for the championship game, they probably had around 15,000. I haven't seen the final stats, but they probably had around 15,000 for the championship.
And you had many other games with lots of people.
Yeah.
It was located in Charlotte this year.
Yeah. It's the third largest tournament. Now it's the fourth because the PAC has gotten involved in postseason tournaments. It is the fourth largest postseason basketball tournament in the United States.
Well, that's very interesting. Today on African American Legends, we've been talking with Howie Evans, the sports editor of the New York Amsterdam News, and we've been exploring the role of the black sports writer in helping to develop the image and the projection of blacks in the sports industry. Thanks again, Howie Evans, for being with us on today's African American Legends.